The void was silent, yet within that silence, there was a disturbance, a slow, rolling pulse that was not sound but something deeper, more ancient. It rippled through the Imperium like the beating of a colossal heart, a tremor so vast that even the most jaded astropaths trembled when they felt it in their minds. Across the far reaches of the Segmentum Pacificus, Imperial beacons faltered, their guiding light stuttering as if some unseen hand had brushed against the fabric of reality itself. Ships lost course without reason, and dreams were haunted by visions of impossible shapes moving beneath black waters that did not exist. In the Astronomican's great choir chamber, hundreds of psychers screamed at once, collapsing like marionettes, whose strings had been severed. Those who survived whispered broken words. The deep rises. The abyss remembers. The high lords of terror, far removed yet ever vigilant, dispatched a message to the nearest fleet commander: investigate, contain, and report. No further details were given. To question too deeply was to risk madness or worse. Thus the Gloria Invictus, a venerable lunar-class cruiser, was ordered to depart immediately. Its captain, Lord Militant Vaskar, did not relish the task. The orders had been delivered by a robed inquisitorial agent who had spoken in a tone that brooked no hesitation. You will go to the edge of the system known as Pelagos Theta. You will locate the source of these disturbances, and you will silence it, if silence can still be achieved. Vaskar's hands trembled slightly as he gave the command to translate from the warp. Even for a man who had stared down orc warbands and traitor fleets, there was something about this mission that filled him with unease. The navigator aboard his vessel had reported strange lights beneath the currents of the warp, a deep flickering glow like the reflection of a torch seen through water. Worse, a whispering chant had filled the bridge for several minutes during their transit, though no Vox units had been active. Even the most disciplined officers avoided speaking of it aloud. When the ship breached real space, there was no immediate threat, no enemy fleet waiting in ambush, only the emptiness of the void and a distant blue-green planet spinning slowly beneath them. At first glance, Pelagos Theta seemed untouched, its seas and land masses serene beneath the light of a dying sun. Yet the Auspex readings told a different story. There were no Vox signals from the surface, no Imperial beacons, no trace of functioning cities, an entire world silent. Vaskar's heart sank as he stared at the readings. Deploy reconnaissance craft, he ordered. Scan for heat signatures and life signs. I want full data before we commit ground forces. The first shuttle descended through the planet's atmosphere, passing over vast stretches of ocean and broken coastline. What they saw chilled the crew's blood. Settlements reduced to rubble, their streets eerily pristine, as though the destruction had not come from bombardment, but from some unseen hand that had swept away all life while leaving the buildings intact. Vehicles were abandoned mid-road, their engines long since cold. The remains of a grand cathedral jutted from the waves, its spire snapped like a broken bone. The water around it churned with a strange rhythm, as though stirred by a heartbeat beneath the surface. The pilot activated his Vox, voice unsteady. Command, this is Recon 1. We're detecting seismic activity. Massive, deep, and irregular. It's like the planet itself is breathing. Vaskar listened in silence, his fingers drumming against the command throne. Before he could respond, a new signal blared through the bridge, a psychic scream, raw and terrible, that cut through machinery and flesh alike. Astropaths fell dead where they sat. The ship's Geller field flickered for an instant, allowing a glimpse of the Imperium beyond, a vast shadow moving through currents of roiling madness, its form indistinct but immense, like a continent adrift upon an unseen sea. One of the surviving spikers clutched at Vaskar's leg, eyes white with terror. It is awake, he croaked. The Deep One rises. It remembers what the stars have forgotten. Emperor, save us all. Before Vaskar could demand clarification, the planet itself seemed to groan. From the surface of the sea, a column of water surged upward, higher than a hive spire, before crashing back in a titanic wave that rolled toward the shore. The recon craft was caught in the maelstrom and vanished from all reading. Moments later, the ship's Auspex registered something even more terrifying, a colossal mass moving beneath the oceans, so vast that its shadow covered entire regions at once. It was not tectonic activity. It was alive. Then, without warning, The void darkened. Strange shapes appeared on long-range scanners, organic, pulsating vessels descending through the upper atmosphere. Tyranids, a hive fleet, had arrived silently, its tendrils coiling around the system like a tightening fist. They had not come for war. They had come to feast. Vaskar's officers shouted overlapping reports, panic threatening to break discipline. But as the first Tyranid organisms began to descend toward the surface, another sound cut through the chaos, a deep resonant roar that shook the air and made even the alien creatures hesitate mid-flight. It was not a sound meant for mortal ears. It was the voice of something primordial, something older than the galaxy itself. The roar echoed across the planet, across the fleet, across the void, and then silence fell once more. The roar did not merely echo through the air. It seemed to resonate through stone, water, and bone alike. In the hive world of Pelagos Theta, billions felt it in their chests before their ears even registered the sound. It was not a cry of an animal or the war shout of an army, but something far older, a voice dredged up from the abyss of prehistory. Even as the sound faded into memory, its presence lingered like a bruise upon the senses, leaving mortals shaken and silent. For a heartbeat, the entire planet seemed to hold its breath. In Hive Ophion, the largest of the planet's towering cities, the populace gathered in panicked clusters beneath the great archways and plaza. Imperial propaganda servitors wailed hymns of the Emperor's protection, but their tinny voices were drowned out by the chaos of the crowd. Citizens wept openly, clutching their children and relics of faith. Some fell to their knees, convinced they had just heard the voice of a god or a Dane. Governor Melenta Vosk, perched high in her spire of marble and steel, stared out across the endless sprawl of the hive. Even from this distance, she could see plumes of smoke rising from districts where riots had already begun. Reports flooded in from every level of the city. Tram systems stalled, manufactorums shutting down as workers fled, gangs clashing in the underhive. The planetary defense network strained to maintain order, but the fear was too sudden, too overwhelming. Vosk's fingers dug into the arms of her throne as she turned to her senior tactica officer. Was it seismic? She demanded, her voice low but sharp. A tectonic event, perhaps, some flaw in the understructure. The officer hesitated, sweat gleaming on his brow. Governor, the seismic readings are irregular. There was no fault rupture, no planetary instability. It was a single resonance, moving upward through the oceanic bedrock. His throat worked as he swallowed, then forced himself to continue. The pattern resembled a heartbeat, my lady. Her eyes narrowed. A heartbeat the size of a continent. She leaned closer, her voice like a blade. Find me answers, now. In the hive's cathedrals, the ecclesiarchy seized upon the fear like predators, scenting blood. Priest cantors stood before trembling congregations, their voices rising above the din of terrified whispers. Do you not see? Bellowed Cardinal Seravax, his ornate vestments glinting in the candlelight. The Emperor tests. The roar you heard is his judgment made manifest, a divine warning to cast off sin and strengthen faith. Those who falter will be swept away, as dust before the storm. But not all priests preached the same message. Some spoke in hushed tones of prophecy, of ancient texts, found in the archives, that spoke of beasts from the deep, of worlds drowned in wrath before the Imperium was even born. A schism began to grow, invisible but insidious, as cults sprouted in hidden corners of the hive. In the shadows of abandoned manufactorums, icons were fashioned, not of the Emperor's likeness, but of jagged, monstrous forms, drawn from fevered dreams. Whispers spread through the streets like infection. The Deep One will rise, the Deep One will cleanse. Meanwhile, beneath the oceans, the truth stirred. Vast tremors rippled through the black depths, dislodging silt and shattering ancient rock formations. Submersible probes sent by the planetary defense forces were lost within hours, their last transmissions garbled and distorted. One image managed to reach the surface before its signal was cut, a silhouette of something unimaginably large, far beneath the camera's range, gliding with slow, terrible purpose. The sheer scale of it defied comprehension. It was like glimpsing the shadow of a mountain moving beneath the sea. As the governors and priests argued,
The planetary defense regiments prepared for the worst. Colonel Seran of the 18th Ophian Guard walked among his troops as they fortified the outer districts along the coastline. Though they carried less guns and wore flak armor, their expressions betrayed a gnawing dread they could not shake. The ocean stretched before them like an endless wall of black glass, deceptively calm. "You've fought orcs," Seran told them, his voice grim but steady. "You've held back cultists and heretics. Whatever this is, it bleeds like anything else. Remember that, and you'll live." But even he could not fully believe his own words. When the roar had sounded, he had felt it in his marrow, a primal terror older than language. The Guard were trained to fight enemies they could see, enemies they could predict. This was something else entirely. Night fell, but sleep brought no relief. Across the hive world, dreams were plagued by visions of black waters and glowing eyes, of cities crumbling beneath unseen waves. Psychers screamed themselves awake, their minds blistered by contact with something vast and alien. In the silence between screams, they muttered about teeth in the dark and wings beneath the sea. Then came the first true tremor. It struck without warning, a deep shudder that rippled through the entire planet. Towers swayed, oceans heaved, and 1,000 alarms blared at once. Bridges collapsed into the depths, manufactorums toppled like children's toys, and millions were crushed or drowned in an instant. From the orbital stations above, the magnitude of the disaster was plain. Entire coastlines were shifting, as if some colossal shape beneath the sea was pushing upward. Vox channels became a storm of overlapping voices, pleas for aid, screams of terror, prayers to the Emperor. Amid the chaos, one signal cut through clearly, a warning from the Imperial Navy's advanced scouts. "This is Sword of Terror to all forces," the message crackled. "Contact confirmed. Tyranid bioships, inbound, massing at system's edge. Emperor's mercy, there are hundreds of them." Panic surged through the command chambers. The planet was already reeling from internal disaster, and now a hive fleet descended upon them. "Governor," Vosk stared at the tactical display, her voice barely a whisper. Two dooms descending at once. As the Tyranid fleet breached the atmosphere, the first spores rained down like burning meteors. Bioforms erupted across the land, tearing through guard lines with monstrous precision. Yet, even as this new apocalypse began, the ocean boiled. From its depths, a vast shadow rose, its shape breaking the surface in a titanic surge of water. Tyranid spores hung in midair for a breathless moment, as if even they were hesitant before what emerged. The world trembled again, and then the roar came, not distant this time, but deafeningly close, shaking the sky itself. The sky was no longer a sky, it was a living, writhing ceiling of alien flesh and chitin, blotting out the light of the system's sun. Great shadow ships, organic and grotesque, descended through the atmosphere, like descending nightmares. Their carapaces pulsed with bioluminescent veins, and their bellies split open to disgorge countless spore pods that fell like burning meteors. Where they struck, the ground erupted in fire, each un and the shrieks of creatures birthed directly into battle. Colonel Seran stood at the edge of the coastal defense line, his voice hoarse from shouting orders. His men fired volley after volley into the descending swarm, lasgun, beams slicing through the haze of smoke and spore mist. But for every creature that fell, 3 more emerged. Gargoyles swooped overhead, their leathery wings blotting out what little light remained. Termagants and hormagaunts surged forward in relentless waves, their clawed limbs tearing through sandbag fortifications and the flesh of men alike. "Hold the line," Seran bellowed over the cacophony, his power saber raised high. "By the Emperor, stand your ground." But even as he roared his defiance, he could see the truth written in the faces of his soldiers. Fear gnawed at them. They were not fighting an army. They were drowning in an ocean of living weapons. Each Tyranid organism moved with perfect coordination, as if guided by one vast, unseen mind. They fought without hesitation, without exhaustion, without even the slightest hint of mercy. From above, the Imperial Navy struck hard. Orbital bombardments lit the horizon with pillars of fire, vaporizing entire swathes of the Tyranid swarm. But for every crater left behind, more spores fell to fill it, the sky never ceasing its endless rain of monsters. Vox reports screamed conflicting orders. Some sectors were holding, Others over. Coastal hives collapsed into chaos as millions fled inland, trampling one another in their desperation to escape. Governor Vosk's command chamber trembled with each new impact. Advisors shouted, strategists argued, and priests screamed prayers as the hololithic display filled with red markers. Entire cities were going dark, their vox relays silenced one by one. In the midst of this storm, an inquisitorial agent stepped forward, his face hidden beneath a mask of steel and brass. "This is beyond mere planetary defense," he said coldly. "You face a hive fleet, Governor. The shadow in the warp is already here." Vosk turned sharply, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the table. "Explain yourself, Inquisitor. The Tyranids are not an invasion force as you understand it," he said, his voice calm, almost detached. "They are a single organism, divided into countless bodies. Every creature you see below is but a cell in a greater whole. The hive mind directs them, and through the shadow it casts in the warp it will choke your psychers, blind your astropaths, and sever your fleet's communication. You will not receive reinforcements. You will not receive guidance. This world is alone." As if to punctuate his words, a psychic scream ripped through the chamber. Every sanctioned psyker within the hive fell to their knees, clutching their skulls as blood streamed from their eyes and noses. The lights flickered, vox channels died, and the very air seemed to grow heavier. Siravax, the High Cardinal, crossed himself desperately. "The Emperor protect us," he whispered. "The air tastes of madness." Vosk's throat felt tight, her voice barely audible. How many of these creatures are coming?" The Inquisitor's head tilted slightly. "Enough to strip this world bare. They will not stop until every living thing is devoured. Flesh, bone, memory, consumed, digested, repurposed. And when this world is nothing but ash and ocean, they will move on to the next. That is their nature." Outside, the storm grew worse. From orbit, massive bioships descended further, their bulk so vast they resembled small moons. Each one birthed more spores, more creatures, more death. In the oceans, the waters churned violently, as if stirred by some massive force below. For a fleeting moment, one of the orbital picked feeds caught a glimpse of the surface, a strange, rippling disturbance cutting through the waves at impossible speed, trailing foam and shattered wreckage. Colonel Serran received the transmission as his command bunker shook from artillery impacts. He stared at the image, his lips pressed into a thin line. It was massive, far larger than even the largest Tyranid bioform he had ever seen. "Emperor preserve us," he muttered. "What in his name is that?" Before anyone could answer, a seismic tremor rocked the coastline. Entire sections of the shoreline collapsed into the sea, dragging tanks, fortifications, and screaming men into the depths. The water erupted moments later, as a Trigon Prime burst forth, its segmented body writhing, as it tore apart the nearest guard detachment. Dozens more followed, the sand boiling as burrowed organisms breached from beneath. The guard fought desperately, bolters roaring, las guns flashing in disciplined volleys. Artillery batteries unleashed their payloads, blasting great holes in the swarms. Yet the tide never slowed. For every beast felled, more poured forth. Above, harpies and harridans rained bioplasma down upon the defenses, reducing armored columns to molten wreckage. Serran's Vox unit screamed with overlapping pleas, requests for reinforcements, final prayers, death cries. The colonel ignored them all, and focused on holding the line. If they broke here, the inland hives would fall within hours. High above the chaos, the Glory Invictus and its fleet fought a losing battle. Tyranid hive ships rammed Imperial cruisers, their organic hulls latching on like leeches. Boarding organisms tore through bulkheads, devouring entire decks before defenders could respond. Voskar, aboard the flagship, watched in horror as two of his sister ships were dragged screaming into the void, their reactor cores detonating in silent blossoms of light. "The shadow is complete," his navigator reported, voice trembling. "We are blind. The Astronomican's light is gone." In that darkness, an unfamiliar roar rolled upward from the planet below. It was deeper than any Tyranid cry, primal and earth-shaking. Even the swarm faltered for a heartbeat, their perfect coordination momentarily disrupted. On the surface, Seran felt the ground tremble beneath his boots, and for a brief, impossible moment, the Tyranids themselves hesitated. A ripple of confusion passed through the swarm. Then, in the distance, the ocean erupted. A colossal silhouette rose from the depths, a shape so vast it dwarfed the coastal hives, and the swarm alike. The hive fleet had come to consume this world, but something older, something hungrier, had awoken to challenge them. The shadow of the Tyranids met another shadow, and the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. The ocean boiled as though the planet's very heart were being dragged to the surface. Waves surged upward, in walls of water, taller than the highest spires of Hive Ophion, then crashed down with annihilating force, erasing entire coastal districts in an instant. The shrieks of millions were drowned beneath the deafening roar of nature unchained, but even that was nothing compared to the sound that followed. It began deep below, a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through the crust of the planet itself, through stone and metal and flesh. It built steadily, rising into a sound that defied description, a resonance of wrath and hunger, so profound that it seemed to shake the soul. Even the Tyranids faltered as it reached its crescendo, their perfect synchronization stuttering for a heartbeat. Imperial Vox channels erupted in panicked cries as auger readings spiraled into chaos, unable to measure the impossible magnitude of what was emerging. Colonel Seran, standing amidst the ruins of his command post, stared at the churning sea through smoke-stung eyes. The Tyranids around him had gone eerily still, their talons clicking in agitation, their eyeless heads twitching toward the horizon. "What in the throne's name?" one of his lieutenants whispered, his voice breaking. The sea split open. From the abyss rose a shape so vast that for a moment, Seran's mind refused to comprehend it. A jagged crest, black as volcanic glass, breached the surface first, scattering ships like insects. Then came a tower-like head, ridged and scaled, with eyes that burned like twin suns glimpsed through a storm. Water cascaded off its colossal form as it rose higher and higher, revealing a back lined with massive, spined plates that glimmered faintly with an otherworldly blue light. Godzilla had awoken. The creature's breath came in deep, seismic gusts, each exhalation sending hurricane-force winds tearing across the shoreline. Its roar split the heavens, a sound so primal and immense that it silenced battle and storm alike. Imperial Guard soldiers dropped their weapons and clutched their ears, screaming. Even the Tyranid swarm recoiled, their chittering rising to a panicked frenzy. For the first time, they seemed uncertain, their perfect hive coordination rippling with confusion. High above, aboard the Gloria, Invictus, Captain Voskar felt his chest seize as the roar reverberated through the ship's hull. Auger officers shouted readings that made no sense. The mass beneath the surface was larger than any known biotitan, its energy output spiking beyond measurable limit. "Emperor, protect us," Voskar muttered, his voice hoarse. That cannot be a creature. It's a calamity given form." The Inquisitor at his side said nothing. His masked face betrayed no emotion, but his hands tightened on the edge of the hololithic display. "This was here long before the Imperium," he murmured, "perhaps long before mankind ever dreamed of stars. We have awoken something ancient, and we have no control over what it will do." On the surface, chaos. Tyranids surged forward, some driven by instinct to attack, others hesitating as if torn between commands. The hive mind was adapting, analyzing this new threat. Great winged harpies dove toward Godzilla's massive head, shrieking, but a single casual swipe of his clawed hand sent them tumbling into the sea as broken husks. Then the ground itself trembled as a carnifex, a towering monstrosity of chitin and muscle, charged from the ruins of a hive district. It roared, a guttural alien challenge, and hurled itself at Godzilla's lower limb. The beast barely seemed to notice. With a motion almost contemptuous, Godzilla brought his foot down, and the carnifex was reduced to pulp and shattered armor, the impact cracking the earth for hundreds of meters around. The Imperial Guard watched in stunned silence. For a brief, impossible moment, it seemed as if the creature might be an ally. After all, it was destroying the same enemy that had nearly overwhelmed their lines. Some soldiers even cheered, voices breaking with desperate relief. But Seran did not. His instincts screamed at him that this was not salvation, merely a new disaster, "Do not mistake this thing for our friend," he snarled, dragging his men back into position. "It is a force of nature. If it notices us, we are no different from the Tyranid." As if in answer, Godzilla's massive head turned, one glowing eye fixing briefly on the huddled remnants of the guard regiments. Seran felt as if the gaze alone would crush him. Then, just as suddenly, the creature looked away, uninterested, and waded deeper inland with strides that shook the earth. Entire city blocks were swept aside like sandcastles beneath his bulk. The Tyranid swarm adapted quickly. The initial hesitation ended, and their vast intelligence reoriented. Bioforms shifted tactics, converging on the giant. Trigons erupted from beneath the ground, striking from below like monstrous serpents. Winged beasts swarmed from above, spitting acid and plasma. From the horizon, a monstrous Harajudd lumbered forward, its cannon limbs charging with deadly energy. Godzilla did not retreat. His plates began to glow with a deep searing blue light, an ominous radiance that built steadily until the very air shimmered. Then he unleashed it. A beam of pure atomic energy roared from his maw, slicing through the swarm. Entire broods of Tyranids were vaporized in an instant, leaving only scorched earth and rising steam. The Harajudd was bisected where it stood, its remains collapsing into molten slag. From orbit, Voskar watched in horrified awe. The feed from his ship's pictic captures flickered and blurred, unable to fully record the scale of destruction. Even hardened voidsmen whispered prayers under their breath. "By the throne," one officer gasped, "the thing fights like a god." "No," the Inquisitor said softly, his masked gaze locked on the creature below. "A god has purpose. This is hunger and rage given flesh." The Hive Fleet did not falter for long. Even as the first swarms died, new creatures were birthed and deployed. Larger, stranger organisms began to descend from the sky, their forms adapted for one singular task: to bring down this new apex predator. Beneath the ocean, the tremors continued, for though Godzilla had risen, the depths had not yet emptied themselves. Something else stirred far below, ancient and vast, its presence a counterpoint to the Tyranid shadow and the fury of the beast above. On the shoreline, Seran could only watch as the battle escalated beyond mortal comprehension. The fate of his world was no longer in his hands, or even in the hands of the Imperium. It rested in the clash of nightmares, a war of monsters whose outcome none could predict. Above the battlefield, the shadow in the warp thickened, blotting out the psychic light entirely. And in that choking darkness, the hive mind turned its full attention upon this new foe. It did not merely seek to destroy Godzilla, it sought to consume him. The ocean boiled once more, and the war had only just begun. The storm had not passed. It had only shifted, growing heavier, darker, as if the very heavens were holding their breath. Smoke and spores hung thick over the battlefield, turning day into a suffocating twilight. The horizon was a jagged silhouette of ruined hive spires, their once proud towers now twisted wreckage beneath the endless rain of Tyranid bioforms. The ocean's edge was no longer recognizable as coastline. It was a shifting boundary where land and sea warred, each surge of water crashing against swarms of chittering creatures. The tide itself, red with blood, and alien. Colonel Seran staggered through the wreckage of what had once been his forward command post. His men were scattered, their formations broken by the chaos of the duel unfolding before them. They no longer fought in ranks or company. Now they fought in fragments, scattered pockets of Imperial Guard desperately holding whatever ground they could, more to delay the inevitable than to win any true victory. Yet all eyes, human and alien alike, were drawn to the colossus striding inland. Godzilla moved with a terrifying majesty, each step shaking the ground like a localized quake. Buildings toppled in his wake, bridges snapped, and roads split apart beneath his sheer weight. His dorsal spines glimmered faintly, glowing with an inner power that seemed to pulse in rhythm with his steps. The Tyranid swarm surged around him like a living tide, yet he walked through them as if they were nothing more than air. For the first time, Seran saw the full shape of the enemy arrayed against them. Tyranid creatures swarmed across the ruins in a grotesque parody of coordination. Termagants poured forward in endless streams,
their living rifles spitting bioacid into the ranks of retreating guardsmen. Larger monstrosities, carnifexes, tyrannifexes, and trigons, moved among them like living siege engines, smashing fortifications, and consuming defenders. Overhead, gargoyles and winged harpies filled the air in a writhing cloud of leathery wings and shrieking calls. It was not an army, it was a world-sized organism, one mind with 1,000,000,000 limbs.
And now that mind had noticed the intruder. The first wave of Tyranids struck Godzilla like a storm surge. A dozen carnifexes charged at once, their massive forms slamming into the creature's lower limbs. Trigons erupted from beneath the ground in coordinated strikes, their segmented bodies coiling upward like monstrous serpents. Above, gargoyles dove in swarms so dense they turned the sky black, their talons raking at Godzilla's face and eyes. The beast roared, a sound so immense it seemed to rend the very air, and swatted entire broods aside with casual sweeps of his claws. One trigon managed to coil around his leg, its barbed tail stabbing deep into his hide, but a single wrenching movement tore it free. Godzilla's jaws closed on the writhing creature, biting it in half with a sickening crunch. The lower half fell to the ground, thrashing and spraying acid, while the upper half vanished down the Titan's gullet. Seren's Vox officer, pale and trembling, spoke in a near whisper. "Colonel, look, he's eating them." Seren said nothing. He could barely think, his mind teetering on the edge of disbelief. Godzilla was not merely fighting the Tyranids. He was feeding, reclaiming dominance in the most primal way imaginable. This was not war as the Imperium understood it. This was a contest between predators, a clash of apex beings. The Tyranid response shifted almost instantly. The hive mind, vast and calculating, adapted to this new threat with terrifying speed. The lesser organisms began to reposition, clearing space for larger bioforms. Then the ground itself heaved as a monstrous shape emerged, a Tyranid hierojola, its colossal body bristling with biocannons and bone scythes. It charged at Godzilla with an unearthly screech, its limbs tearing through buildings like paper. The impact when they met shook the battlefield. Godzilla caught the charging bio-titan with both hands, his claws sinking into its chitinous carapace. The hierojolas slashed wildly, severing flesh and drawing dark blood, but Godzilla's strength was overwhelming. With a titanic heave, he lifted the creature overhead and hurled it into the sea. The resulting splash sent tidal waves racing inland, swamping Tyranids and guardsmen alike. The moment was captured by orbital pict feeds, though the images were grainy and distorted by interference. Aboard the Gloria Invictus, Captain Veskar watched the feed with wide, unblinking eyes. The entire bridge crew was silent, their fear palpable. "Emperor, help us," one officer whispered. It fights as if the swarm is nothing. A creature that size should not even exist, let alone dominate like this." The Inquisitor's voice was calm, but beneath the metallic mask there was a note of unease. "Do not mistake this display for an alliance. The enemy of your enemy is still your doom. It destroys the Tyranids because they challenge its dominion, not because it seeks to save us." Veskar turned sharply. "And what dominion would that be?" "The only kind that matters," the Inquisitor said softly. "Survival, hunger, the law written into the marrow of creation itself." On the surface that law was written in blood. As Godzilla waded inland, the Tyranid swarm shifted tactics again. Harpies and gargoyles concentrated their attacks on his eyes and dorsal plates, attempting to blind and cripple him. Spore chimneys were seeded ahead of his advance, birthing new creatures by the thousand. Entire broods were sacrificed in suicidal charges to slow his progress. At the same time, the Tyranid fleet above intensified its assault on the Imperial Navy. Spore pods and living projectiles rained down in relentless waves, striking the void shields of Imperial cruisers. 2 frigates were split open like carcasses, their decks spilling into the void as Tyranid boarding organisms poured in. Veskar gritted his teeth, issuing orders through clenched jaws: "Redirect fire to the hive ship's ventral cluster. If we cannot stop their rain of spores, this world is lost before the surface war even begins." Even as he spoke, the Vox network faltered. The shadow in the warp had grown thicker, smothering psychic communication. Astropaths screamed and collapsed, their minds overwhelmed by the collective presence of the hive mind. The bridge was plunged into semi-darkness as the lights flickered and died. Back on the planet, Seren's remaining forces were in full retreat. They no longer had the strength to hold even a semblance of a line. As they fell back toward the inner hive walls, they caught glimpses of the titanic struggle behind them. Godzilla was now fully surrounded, the Tyranid swarming his legs, climbing his back, biting, tearing, stabbing with claws and spines. Yet still he advanced, with a guttural roar. Godzilla's dorsal spines lit up with a searing electric glow. The light built rapidly, growing so intense that the air warped around it. Then, in a single devastating exhalation, he unleashed his atomic breath. The beam cut through the swarm like the judgment of a god, vaporizing hundreds of Tyranid creatures and carving a smoking trench miles long into the earth. The sight stopped Seren in his tracks. His men, battered and bleeding, turned to watch. Even the Tyranids paused for a moment, their perfect unity disrupted by something primal, perhaps even fear. One of Seren's lieutenants whispered, his voice barely audible over the distant thunder of battle. "Colonel, which one are we supposed to fight?" Seren did not answer. Above them all, the sky was filled with fire and wings, and the war between nightmares raged on without mercy. Hive burned beneath a sky of living darkness. The glow of countless fires turned the clouded heavens into a vast, smoldering dome. Ash drifted down like snow, coating the streets in a gray pallor that muffled all color. The distant battle between Godzilla and the Tyranids was felt in every tremor beneath the city's foundations, every groaning of its towers as they strained against the Each quake sent the frightened masses, surging through the lower districts, in blind terror, trampling one another in their desperation to escape. The hives had known riots, wars, even orbital bombardments, but nothing in living memory matched the fear that now consumed the populace. Inside the grand basilica of the Emperor's Light, thousands huddled in the flickering glow of devotional candles. The cathedral's stained glass windows, which once depicted scenes of imperial victory, were cracked and blackened from stray spore impact. Beneath the towering statues of saints and martyrs, priests shouted themselves hoarse, their voices trembling as they fought to impose order on the masses. Cardinal Seremarx stood at the center pulpit, his ornate vestments now tattered and stained with soot. His once commanding voice rang out, echoing from the vaulted ceilings. "Children of the Emperor, this is not the hour of despair, but of trial. The roar you have heard is his divine wrath made manifest. It is his will that the impure be purged, that the faithful endure." The crowd answered in a ragged chorus, some shouting prayers, others sobbing openly. Yet beneath their fear, a different note stirred, a quiet, rising murmur that carried through the assembly. In the far corners of the basilica, beneath the shadow of shattered statues, a rival faction whispered. These were not loyal imperial citizens but cultists, their eyes gleaming with feverish conviction. They had seen the titanic creature rise from the sea, had felt its power shake the world, and to them it was no monster. It was salvation. "The Deep One has come," one cultist hissed to his neighbors, clutching a crude idol shaped like jagged spines and a gaping maw. "The false emperor's time is over. The Deep One will cleanse this world of weakness and sin. The Tyranids are but vermin to be swept aside before his might." Around them, the faithful and the faithless jostled shoulder to shoulder. One woman screamed when she saw the idol, and her cry set off a chain reaction of panic. A fight erupted, fists and blades flashing in the candlelight. The priests bellowed for calm, but their voices were drowned in the chaos. Seremarx slammed his staff against the pulpit, his face contorted with fury. "Blasphemers, apostates, you dare bring idolatry into this sacred house." The cultists laughed, their voices rising above the din. "Your emperor is a corpse on a throne. Our God walks the earth, and crushes our enemies beneath his feet." The first shot rang out. It was impossible to tell who fired it, but within moments the basilica was a battlefield. Lasfire streaked through the smoky air, as the faithful and the heretical turned on each other. Blood pooled at the base of the statues,
mingling with spilled sacred oils. The towering effigy of Saint Varian toppled as a stray explosion struck its base, shattering it into fragments that crushed dozens beneath its weight. Outside, the chaos spread through the streets. Civilians, already terrified by the constant quakes and distant roars, now found themselves caught in the crossfire of competing mobs. Some fled to the outer walls, seeking safety in the presence of the guard. Others joined the cultists, screaming praises to the Deep One, as they daubed crude sigils on walls with their own blood. Colonel Seren's retreating forces stumbled into this maelstrom as they fell back from the coast. Exhausted, wounded, and outnumbered, his troops found their path blocked, not only by Tyranid spores, but by rioting civilians. Seren's jaw clenched as he surveyed the chaos. "Damn it all," he growled, drawing his sidearm. "We don't have time for this madness. Clear a path, non-lethal if you can, lethal if you must." His men obeyed, firing into the air to scatter the crowds. Some obeyed and fled, others hurled themselves at the guard with wild suicidal fury. In the confusion, Seren caught sight of one of the cultists, a ragged man clutching a shard of metal carved into a crude likeness of Godzilla's dorsal plates. The man's eyes burned with religious zeal as he screamed, "The Deep One rises, the false Emperor's light will be drowned." Before Seren could react, the man was trampled underfoot as the crowd surged again. The colonel spat a curse, his stomach twisting. This was no longer merely a war against Xenos. The planet itself was tearing apart from within. High above, Governor Vosk watched the Hive's descent into anarchy from her spire's observation deck. The city stretched below like a dying animal, its lights flickering, its streets choked with fire and smoke. The distant roars of battle carried even here, each one reverberating through the stone like a drumbeat of doom. At her side, the Inquisitor stood silent, his masked face unreadable. "You knew this would happen," Vosk accused, her voice trembling. "You knew faith would fracture the moment they saw that thing." The Inquisitor did not turn his head. "Faith is a blade, Governor. It can defend or destroy, depending on whose hand holds it. The ecclesiarchy will not unify these people now, not while they witness a creature that defies all scripture." Vosk's hands trembled as she gripped the railing. "Then what are we to do? Half my cities are in rebellion, the other half besieged by Tyranids, and that thing is moving inland, trampling everything in its path." The Inquisitor finally turned to face her. "You hold your lines as best you can, and you pray the beast and the swarm destroy each other before either turns its full attention to you." A sudden tremor nearly threw them both to the floor. Vosk's eyes widened as she steadied herself. "That was stronger than the last one. Is it the Tyranids?" "No," the Inquisitor said, his voice grim. "That was it, moving closer." Below, the clash between Godzilla and the swarm had reached new heights. The Tyranids had adapted once more, birthing organisms specifically designed to match the creature's size and strength. Massive bio-titans descended from the skies, their forms blotting out the fires below. Godzilla roared his defiance, his atomic breath slicing through the swarm in pillars of blue-white light. To the faithful, it was a vision of divine wrath. To the heretics, it was proof of their prophecy. To Seren and his surviving soldiers, it was simply the end of the world made flesh. As the Hive burned, and faith fractured, the line between savior and destroyer blurred until no one could tell the difference. And above it all, the war of monsters raged on, uncaring, unstoppable, while humanity's belief crumbled into ruin. The battlefield had become a vision of hell itself. From the shattered coast to the gutted streets of Hive Fleets, the land was unrecognizable, consumed by war beyond mortal reckoning. Smoke and ash thickened the air, until it seemed the world itself was suffocating. Tyranid spore chimneys belched forth, clouds of alien fumes, twisting the light into a sickly green haze. Across this nightmare landscape strode two titanic forces, one born of the endless hunger of the void, the other, an ancient primal fury awakened from the depth. Godzilla moved inland with inexorable purpose. His colossal form loomed above ruined spires, each footstep reducing entire city blocks to rubble. The glow of his dorsal plates pulsed faintly, casting flickering blue light that cut through the darkness. His deep rumbling growls rolled across the battlefield like thunder, a constant reminder of his terrible presence. Around his legs, the Tyranid swarm surged endlessly, clawing, and biting, their countless bodies forming a living sea that sought to drown him. Yet he did not falter. With sweeps of his massive tail, he crushed broods of termagants and hormagaunts into pulped remains. A single step sent shockwaves through the ground, toppling alien spore towers and scattering creatures like leaves before a storm. He moved not with haste but with inevitability, like a natural disaster made flesh, an unanswerable truth, to which the galaxy itself must bend. But the hive mind was no passive observer. Its vast consciousness stretched across the swarm, calculating, adapting, responding with terrifying speed. The initial waves of smaller creatures had been mere testing strikes. Now the true counterattack began. From the far horizon, new forms appeared, monstrosities unlike anything the Guard had ever faced. A brood of trigons erupted from the ground in unison, their segmented bodies arching high as they struck at Godzilla's limbs, like striking serpents. Above, a cloud of gargoyles descended, blotting out what little light remained, their acidic projectiles hissing as they struck Godzilla's hide. And at the center of it all, a new terror advanced, a pair of Hierophant bio-titans, each one a towering nightmare of bone and muscle. The two titans moved with horrifying speed for creatures of their size, their massive seething limbs carving through wreckage and corpses alike. Their footfalls sent tremors rippling through the battlefield, mirroring Godzilla's own seismic strides. Their shrieks were alien and piercing, psychic echoes reverberating in the minds of every living thing nearby. Colonel Saren and his ragged remnants watched from the shattered remains of an elevated causeway. His men were silent, their lasguns held uselessly at their sides. Even battle-hardened veterans could not comprehend what they were witnessing. "Emperor, preserve us," one trooper whispered, his voice breaking. How do we fight this?" Saren did not answer. He simply stared at the scene unfolding before them, his mind caught between awe and despair. This was no battle in any human sense. It was something older, a clash of predators so far beyond them that their survival seemed an afterthought. The Hierophants struck first, charging in a coordinated assault. Their massive scythe limbs swung in arcs capable of cleaving battle tanks in half. One slammed into Godzilla's flank, slicing deep into his flesh. A roar erupted from his throat, shaking the very air, but instead of retreating, he retaliated with a savage fury. His jaws closed around the Hierophant's upper carapace, teeth sinking deep. With a wrenching motion, he tore free a massive chunk of the creature's body, hurling it aside, as gore rained down like a crimson storm. The second Hierophant leapt onto Godzilla's back, its claws digging deep. It drove its barbed limbs again and again into his spine, seeking to cripple him. Godzilla staggered under the assault, his bellow of pain reverberating across the city. Smaller Tyranid organisms swarmed upward, clambering over his legs and tail, biting and slashing in a frenzy of instinctive violence. From orbit, the Gloria Invictus recorded the battle through its failing pictactures. Captain Voskar stood transfixed, his officers too stunned to speak. On the hololithic display, the combat was reduced to shifting silhouettes and heat signatures, but the sheer scale of the violence was unmistakable. The Inquisitor's voice was a low murmur beneath the bridge's chaos. The hive mind has shifted its focus entirely. It now sees this creature as the greatest threat to its consumption. It will throw everything it has to bring it down. And if it succeeds? Voskar asked, his throat dry. The Inquisitor turned his masked face toward him. Then it will consume what it killed. Imagine a hive fleet, with this thing's strength at its core.
On the surface, the battle reached a fever pitch. Godzilla roared again, his dorsal plates flaring with brilliant blue light. The glow built rapidly, the very air vibrating with the gathering energy. Then he unleashed it, a torrent of atomic fire that erupted from his maw in a searing beam. The blast struck the Hierophant clinging to his back, vaporizing it in an instant. The beam carved through the swarm below, leaving a smoking trench miles long. The remaining Hierophant staggered under the onslaught, its chitinous armor melting, its psychic scream echoing across the battlefield. In its death throes it hurled itself forward, impaling Godzilla's chest with its scythe limb. Black blood gushed forth, hissing as it struck the ground. Godzilla bellowed in rage and pain, seizing the creature with both hands and ripping it apart in a spray of gore. For a moment there was silence. Even the swarm seemed to hesitate, their perfect unity disrupted by the loss of their bio-titan. Godzilla stood amid the carnage, his chest heaving, his glowing eyes sweeping the battlefield. Then the hive mind responded. From the skies above, vast shadow ships descended lower, their fleshy hulls pulsating. New spores rained down in unprecedented numbers, their impacts shaking the ground like bombardments. Entire new broods emerged, monstrous creatures birthed fully formed for war. Among them came a new shape, larger, more terrifying than any before. Saren's breath caught as he saw it through the haze. Throne. It's building something to match him. Godzilla turned toward the approaching threat, his spines glowing once more. The Tyranid swarm surged forward in perfect unison, no longer attacking blindly but with terrifying coordination. The devourer of worlds had met a living titan, and neither side would yield. The ground itself seemed to shudder beneath their approach as the next clash began, and the fate of an entire planet trembled in the balance. The air itself seemed to thicken as the hive mind's full will descended upon the battlefield. The swarm, once an ocean of chaotic violence, shifted into perfect terrifying precision. It was as though every creature, every gaunt, every winged beast, every lurking horror beneath the earth, had inhaled in unison and now moved with a single breath. The psychic weight of its presence pressed down upon every living mind nearby, smothering thought, crushing hope, until even the most battle-hardened guardsman trembled without knowing why. Colonel Saren felt it first, a pressure at the back of his skull, like icy claws scratching at his thought. He staggered and gripped the side of a shattered hab block, his breath ragged. Around him soldiers dropped to their knees, some clutching their heads, others screaming prayers that dissolved into mindless babble. Vox units flickered and died, their signals overwhelmed by the shadow in the wall. Saren forced himself to raise his head and saw the Tyranids halting their advance, not in retreat, but in eerie, perfect formation, their heads tilting toward a single point in the sky. From above, a new shape descended through the spore-choked cloud. It was larger than any hive ship yet seen, its bulk eclipsing the fires below, a floating mountain of living tissue and alien sinew. Great tendrils extended from its underside, writhing like the roots of some colossal tree. Its surface was alive with motion, countless smaller organisms crawling across it, birthing, dying, and birthing again in a cycle of relentless creation. Captain Voskar watched from the Gloria Invictus, his bridge crew pale and silent. The hololithic display struggled to render the vast bioship's size, its outline flickering and breaking apart as the machine spirits groaned under the strain. What is that thing?" Voskar asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The Inquisitor's masked visage remained fixed on the descending shape. "An apex synaptic node," he said slowly. "The hive mind has chosen to incarnate more of its will here than I have ever witnessed. It has recognized the creature below as a true rival, and it will not tolerate rivals." On the surface, the swarm's behavior shifted entirely. The lesser creatures scattered to form rings of living defense, clearing space at the heart of the battlefield. From the enormous bioship above, new spores descended, each one the size of a manufactorum dome. When they struck the ground, they split open with wet, tearing sounds, disgorging horrors the likes of which no imperial record had catalogued. The first of these monstrosities was unlike any Tyranid seen before. Taller than the ruins of Hive Ophion's highest towers, its frame was a grotesque mimicry of Godzilla's own size and mass. Chitinous plates overlapped in layers like jagged armor, and its elongated skull bore a crown of psychic antennae that glowed with malignant light. It bellowed a psychic scream so powerful that every human within kilometers collapsed to the ground. Blood streaming from their eyes and ears, even Godzilla paused, his head tilting as if he too felt the alien challenge in that sound. Saren forced himself to his feet, swaying like a drunkard. Through blurred vision he saw the two titans face each other, one born of the primal depths, the other sculpted by the cold will of the hive mind. His voice rasped from a throat raw with smoke and fear. It made a monster to fight a monster. The Tyranid bio-titan charged with shocking speed, its clawed limbs gouging deep trenches into the earth as it ran. Godzilla roared in response, a sound that split the storm and shook entire buildings into collapse. When the two collided,
The impact was like a planetary quake. Entire districts crumbled, and tidal waves surged outward from the shock, sweeping away defenders and aliens alike. The battle was unlike anything Saren had ever witnessed. The Tyranid construct fought with a predator's cunning, its movements directed by the full intellect of the hive mind. Where Godzilla's strength was raw and elemental, the Tyranid Titan's was precise and calculated. It struck at his legs to unbalance him, at his eyes to blind him, at his dorsal plates to disrupt the strange energy building within them. Smaller organisms swarmed alongside their champion, harrying Godzilla's flanks, climbing his limbs like living chains. Godzilla, wounded but undaunted, fought back with sheer primal rage. His claws rent vast gouges in the Bio-Titan's chitinous hide, each strike tearing free gouts of alien ichor. He slammed his tail into the creature with bone-crushing force, sending it crashing through a row of ruined hab spires. When the Tyranid Titan attempted to rise, Godzilla's foot pinned it down, and his jaws descended toward its throat. But the hive mind anticipated the move. At that instant, hundreds of smaller organisms hurled themselves at Godzilla's face, exploding in bursts of acidic ichor that seared his flesh. Blinded and enraged, he stumbled backward, giving the Bio-Titan space to strike. It surged upward, driving a massive scythe limb deep into his shoulder. The sound that followed was a roar of fury so immense that it silenced every other noise on the battlefield for a heartbeat. Above, the hive ship pulsed with renewed energy. Vast streams of psychic power flowed through its tendrils and into the swarm below. The hive mind was not merely fighting with flesh, it was playing a game of strategy on a planetary scale. Imperial forces across the planet felt the weight of its attention turn fully upon them. Guard regiments collapsed as their commanders went mad, overwhelmed by visions of endless hunger. Tanks swerved wildly, their machine spirits screaming as they tried to flee. Even the orbiting Navy vessels began to falter as their navigators were driven into convulsions by psychic assault. On the Gloria Invictus, alarms howled. Vox channels failed one by one, their last messages little more than garbled screams. Voskar gripped the arms of his command throne, his face pale. "We are losing all cohesion," his adjutant reported, her voice shaking. "If this continues, our fleet will turn on itself." The Inquisitor's tone was like cold iron. "We are already lost. This is no longer a battle for survival. It is a gambit. The hive mind does not merely wish to destroy the creature, it wishes to claim it. Imagine, Captain, if this Godzilla was subsumed into the swarm, a living weapon beyond comprehension, replicated endlessly across the galaxy." Voskar's heart sank. "Then we must kill them both." The Inquisitor gave no reply, but his silence was answer enough. Below, Godzilla staggered beneath the combined assault. His spines flickered weakly, their glow dulled by his wounds. The Tyranid Titan pressed its advantage, driving him backward toward the ocean. Saren watched, barely conscious, as the waves behind Godzilla began to churn. Something vast moved beneath the surface. Unseen but unmistakable. He remembered the first tremors, the first roar that had heralded Godzilla's awakening, and a sickening thought took root in his mind. "What if?" he whispered to no one. "There is more than one." The sea swelled higher, and the hive mind's gambit had only begun. The command chamber of Hive Ophion was a place of frenzy and despair. Hololithic projectors sputtered with static, throwing fractured images of the surface war into the smoky air. One moment, a view of Godzilla locked in mortal combat with the Tyranid Titan filled the chamber. The next, the display fractured into meaningless streaks of red and green as interference from the shadow in the warp smothered every signal. The room stank of incense, burned in desperation, and sweat from the fear of those within. Governor Vosk stood at the center of the chaos, her fingers digging into the edge of the war table until her knuckles turned white. Around her, advisors shouted conflicting reports. Vox officers screamed into dead channels, while the air filled with the dissonant clamor of failing machinery and failing men. "Reports from Sector 9 are gone, my lady," a tactical officer cried, his voice breaking. "The 32nd Regiment has vanished from auger readings entirely." Another officer cut across him, trembling as he relayed his own nightmare. "And Sector 11 has turned on itself. Loyalists and cultists are at war in the streets." The faithful scream for salvation, while the heretics hail that thing as their god. The chamber erupted in shouts, each voice louder and more desperate than the last. Some begged for reinforcements, others demanded orbital bombardments, many simply screamed, their words stripped of reason. Vosk slammed her fist onto the table with a force that silenced them all. Her eyes blazed with fury as she looked to the only figure in the room who remained utterly still. The Inquisitor, his masked face, revealed nothing, but his very presence seemed to darken the air around him. You brought me here to lead, Vosk spat. Then tell me how to save this world. The Inquisitor turned his head slowly toward her. When he spoke, his voice was calm and cold, a blade of logic cutting through the storm. You are mistaken, Governor. There is no saving this world.
His words fell like a sentence of death. The chamber erupted again, voices crying out in horror and rage. Vosk's mouth opened and closed, her breath caught in her throat. Then what do you suggest? Surrender? Extermination? The Inquisitor inclined his head slightly. Exterminatus is not an option. Not yet. The Tyranids will consume anything we destroy. Fire alone cannot deny them, and as for the beast, his masked gaze shifted to the distorted image of Godzilla on the hololith. It is beyond destruction by ordinary means. Even the might of the Imperial Navy would bleed itself dry attempting to bring it down. Voskar's voice cracked over the Vox channel linking the fleet above to the chamber below. Inquisitor, you speak as though we have choices. My ships are being torn apart. The swarm presses us from every direction. Our void shields are failing. Our navigators are mad with the shadow, and the Astronomicon is lost to us. If we do nothing, we die. Doing nothing and striking blindly are one and the same. The Inquisitor replied. The hive mind adapts faster than you can strike. Every move you make, it counters. Every weapon you deploy, it devours and replicates. If we are to act, we must be precise. Vosk's voice rose again, high and shrill with desperation. Precise, while my world burns, while millions die every hour. Look at what is happening below. My cities are gone, my armies scattered, my people turning to madness and false gods. If you have a plan, speak it, or I will have you thrown from this chamber. The Inquisitor did not flinch. My plan is simple. We must decide which apocalypse we prefer. The words froze the room into silence. He gestured toward the hololith, where the image briefly steadied enough to show the two titans locked in battle. Godzilla slammed the Tyranid creation into the ruins of Hive Ophion's outer wall, toppling entire districts in a single motion. Around them the swarm shifted like a living ocean, pouring toward the clash from all directions. The Hive fleet will not stop, the Inquisitor said. Left unchecked, it will consume this world, then the next, and the next. After that, all life, all history, all memory will be stripped to the bone and remade into weapons of war. It is hunger incarnate. He turned slightly, his voice dropping to a low, venomous whisper. But the beast, it is not hunger, it is wrath. It has no empire, no fleets, no ambition. It simply is. A force of nature given form. If it defeats the Tyranids, it may leave this world when its challenge is ended, or it may turn on us. We cannot know, but we do know this. The Hive fleet will never stop. Vosk swayed on her feet, the weight of his words pressing down upon her like the atmosphere before a storm. You're asking me to choose, she whispered. Yes, the Inquisitor said. Choose which enemy you wish to gamble on. Aid the beast against the swarm, and perhaps it will leave when the threat is ended, or strike at it, weaken it, and hope the Tyranids do not grow strong enough to devour us all. The chamber erupted again, this time into furious argument. Some officers shouted for immediate fire upon Godzilla, calling him the greater threat to imperial dominion. Others demanded that they focus on the Tyranids, arguing that without the beast, there would be nothing to slow the swarm's advance. Voskar's voice crackled over the link once more. Governor, the Navy cannot hold both fronts. If you wish us to strike at the swarm, we must abandon the bombardments targeting the creature. If you order us to focus on the beast, the swarm will overrun the planet within hours. The decision hung in the air like a guillotine. Siravax, the High Cardinal, stumbled forward. His robes were torn, his face streaked with blood and ash. "Faith must guide us," he cried. "The Emperor's will is clear. The great beast is a sign, a trial sent to test our resolve. We must smite it, and through fire and prayer, we shall prevail." From the shadows, a wounded officer shouted back, his voice raw, "You fool, that thing is the only reason we're still breathing. Without it, the swarm will devour us before dawn." Fists flew, less pistols were drawn. The command chamber teetered on the edge of civil war, mirroring the chaos in the streets below. Vosk closed her eyes, shutting out the shouting. In the darkness behind her lids, she saw the ruins of her world, the faces of her people, and the two titans battling for supremacy. When she opened her eyes, they burned with a cold, terrible resolve. "Voskar," she said into the vox, her voice steady at last, "pull all forces from secondary objectives. Redirect every available weapon toward the swarm. We will let the beast fight its battle, and we will strike only at the Hive Fleet." There was a pause, then Voskar's voice came back, grim and resigned. "Understood." The Inquisitor inclined his head slightly, though whether in approval or calculation, none could see. "A dangerous choice, Governor. Let us hope the beast's hunger ends where the Tyranids do." Far below, Godzilla roared as the Tyranid Titans slammed into him again, the sound echoing through the ruins like the voice of an angry god. Neither creature understood the decision made above. Neither cared. And as the battle raged on, the Imperium placed its fate in the hands of a monster. The ocean boiled beneath a sky of living darkness. What had once been a horizon was now a battlefield, an endless expanse of writhing Tyranid bioships, locked in combat with the battered remnants of the Imperial Navy. The waters themselves seemed alive, churned by the movements of creatures so vast their shadows swallowed entire fleets. Each wave that rose and fell was not merely the work of wind or tide, but the aftershock of gods clashing beneath the surface. Captain Voskar stood at the forward viewport of the Gloria Invictus, his hands gripping the edge of his command throne, until the metal creaked beneath his gauntlet. Through the mist and smoke, he could see the towering spore chimneys erupting from the ocean surface, each birthing clouds of winged Tyranid organisms. The sky was a swarm of flapping shadows, their screeches mingling with the boom of Imperial macro cannons and the relentless hiss of acid bombardments. "Portside void shield is failing," an officer screamed over the din. "Auxiliary generators down by 30%. Hull breaches on decks 9 through 14. Damage control teams are gone, sir." Voskar didn't flinch. His eyes remained fixed on the abyss below, where something far greater than his fleet stirred. Deep beneath the waves, two colossal forces converged, the Tyranid apex titan, shaped by the hive mind's will, and the ancient Leviathan known only by the roar that had shaken the stars. Their struggle rippled outward in titanic tremors, sending walls of water crashing against the Navy's formations. From above, it was almost incomprehensible. Vast alien shapes coiled and struck beneath the surface, their outlines barely visible through the black water. Occasionally one would rise for an instant, a flash of jagged dorsal spines glowing with a cold blue light, or the glimmering carapace of the Tyranid biotitan breaching like a nightmare-given flesh. Each emergence was followed by a detonation of sound and fury, waves exploding outward as though the sea itself were screaming. "Emperor's teeth," Voskar breathed. "We're fighting over the ruins of a world while another war rages beneath our feet." The Inquisitor, standing silent beside him, finally spoke. "Not war, judgment. The sea is their arena, Captain. Whoever emerges will claim this planet." On the surface, the Imperial Navy fought desperately to survive. Cruisers unleashed broadsides into the sky, their shells tearing vast holes through gargoyle swarms and ripping chunks from descending spore pods. Lance batteries lanced upward like spears of sunlight piercing a storm, striking the descending hive ships with bursts of superheated plasma. But for every alien ship destroyed, two more descended to take its place. The Tyranid fleet did not maneuver as humans understood it. They did not retreat, did not falter. They simply pressed forward with relentless, perfect coordination. Organic rams smashed into Imperial hulls, tearing through adamantium plating as if it were paper. Boarding organisms poured through the breaches, their clawed limbs scything through defenders, in an unstoppable tide. On the Gloria Invictus, warning runes flared crimson. Multiple contacts beneath the surface,
a Vox officer cried. Massive, moving fast, their Emperor help us, they're right under us. Before Voskar could respond, the ocean erupted. A column of water surged skyward, engulfing entire ship. At its heart rose Godzilla, his form fully revealed at last beneath the pale glow of the fleet's failing lights. His spines burned with a furious blue radiance, each pulse timed to the deep rumbling growl emanating from his chest. The sheer force of his emergence hurled Tyranid organisms into the air like scattered insects. But he was not alone. Behind him, the Tyranid Biotitan breached the surface, its immense body glistening with slime and alien ip. Unlike the chaotic swarms around it, this creature moved with deliberate precision, every strike guided by the hive mind's will. Its clawed limbs were weapons of terrifying size, each slash powerful enough to sever a battleship's prow. Rows of biocannons opened along its flanks, spewing acidic projectiles into the sea and sky alike. The two giants collided in a clash so violent that the ocean itself seemed to convulse. Waves taller than hive spires rolled outward, smashing into both fleets, indiscriminate. Entire cruisers were lifted from the water and dashed against the surface like toys. Imperial ships and Tyranid vessels alike were torn apart by the sheer scale of the battle. Voskar's bridge crew screamed as the Glory Invictus was thrown onto its side, gravity plating straining to keep the crew from being hurled into bulkheads. Stabilizers failing, someone shouted. We're taking on water. Reactor, shielding at critical. Hold her steady, Voskar roared. Bring the forward batteries to bear. Fire everything we have. Lances and macro cannons blazed, their beams striking the Tyranid swarm with apocalyptic force. Explosions lit the storm-choked sky, briefly illuminating the battle between the titans below. Godzilla's jaws clamped down on the Biotitan's upper carapace, tearing away an entire segment of flesh. The Tyranid creature responded by driving its scythe limb into his chest, black blood spilling into the sea in vast clouds. From beneath, other shapes stirred. Massive tendrils erupted from the deep, dragging down both Imperial and Tyranid ships alike. Enormous Morlocks and Trigons surged upward, their gaping maws swallowing entire squads of guardsmen in a single bite. The ocean was no longer merely water. It was a battlefield layered with countless deaths occurring simultaneously. Seren's battered regiment had been redeployed to the coastline, tasked with protecting the last functioning void shield generator. From their vantage point on the cliffs, they watched the clash unfold in mute horror. The sound alone was indescribable, a symphony of crashing waves, alien shrieks and Godzilla's earth-shattering roar. Colonel, a young trooper whispered, his face streaked with salt and ash. If that thing wins, what happens to us? Seren stared without blinking, his eyes hollow. If the beast wins, he said, we pray it leaves. If it doesn't, he didn't finish. There was no need. In the command chamber, Voss clutched the edge of the hololithic display as it flickered with static. She could see only fragments of the battle, a glimpse of Godzilla's glowing spines, the writhing tendrils of the hive ship, the dying flashes of her fleet. Report, she shouted. What is the status of the Navy? A Vox officer turned to her, tears streaming down his soot-streaked face. There is no Navy, my lady, only wreckage. Her knees buckled, and she nearly collapsed. Around her, the surviving officers wept or stood in stunned silence. The ocean had claimed their last line of defense. On the horizon, the final phase of the battle began. Godzilla unleashed his atomic breath in a column of searing light, the beam tearing through the Biotitan's chest and igniting the surrounding sea into a boiling inferno. The hive mind responded with a psychic scream, so powerful it drove every surviving astropath into madness, their minds bursting like overripe fruit. The shockwave rippled across the planet, toppling towers and silencing cities. The sea itself seemed to recoil as both titans fell back beneath the waves, locked together in a death grip. When the waters closed over them, the surface was left in eerie silence, broken only by the groaning of sinking ships and the cries of the dying. Seren swallowed hard, his voice barely audible. It's not over, he said. It's only gone deeper. As if in answer, a final tremor rolled through the earth. So vast, so deep, that it rattled every remaining structure on the planet. The battle at sea was not an ending. It was a prelude to something far worse. The seas had gone silent, but the silence was worse than the storm. It was not peace, but the breath drawn before a scream. Across Pelagos Theta, the land itself trembled as deep, unseen forces stirred beneath the crust. The cataclysm at sea had not ended the war, it had merely changed its shape. Where once the fight had been contained to the oceans and coasts, now it spilled inland, devouring the very heart of the world. Hive Ophion's towers burned like funeral pyres. Entire districts were reduced to skeletal ruins, their silhouettes black against the crimson glow of the horizon. The sky was a roiling pall of smoke and spores lit by the occasional flicker of distant lance fire or the baleful glow of Tyranid bioplasma raining from above. Streets that had once teemed with billions of Imperial citizens were now rivers of ash and bone, navigated only by the scuttling limbs of alien creatures, or the staggering remnants of the Guard. Colonel Seren led what was left of his regiment through this wasteland. His men were silent, their eyes hollow, their uniforms torn and scorched. They were no longer a fighting force in the traditional sense, but a band of survivors clinging to purpose. Each step was a battle against exhaustion and despair. Vox signals were gone, maps useless. Landmarks had been erased by destruction so thorough that the very city seemed alien. At night, the glow of the fires illuminated the Tyranids swarming in every direction. The swarm had spread beyond the coastal regions, pouring through broken streets and collapsed hablocks like a living flood. Where they passed, nothing living remained. They stripped everything to bare stone and then moved on, leaving behind a silence more terrifying than their screeches.
Seren paused at a shattered plaza, looking up at the hollowed-out shell of a once grand administratum tower. Its upper floors were gone, consumed by fire or collapse. His adjutant approached, limping heavily. "Colonel," he rasped, "we can't hold much longer. Supplies are gone, ammunition will be down to knives and fists before dawn." Seren said nothing. He had no comfort to give, only the grim knowledge that there was nowhere left to run. Above the ever-present haze, a glow pulsed intermittently, faint blue flashes, like lightning contained within a storm cloud. They marked Godzilla's movements, a reminder that the battle between titans was far from finished. The Guard had stopped cheering his appearances. In the beginning, some had called him a savior, a divine wrath, sent to smite the Xenos. Now they understood the truth. Wherever he went, he brought devastation. Cities were leveled, not by accident, but by inevitability, his sheer bulk making survival impossible. The Tyranids followed him like carrion birds, their attention drawn to his fury. Governor Vosk watched the destruction from her spire, though even her vantage point could no longer pierce the smoke completely. Her command chamber was half ruined, one wall open to the choking air. The remaining officers huddled around the last functional hololithic display, its flickering image barely legible through interference. "Report," she demanded, though her voice was hoarse and frayed. An officer swallowed hard before answering. "Hive Ophion is gone, my lady. The inner districts fell 2 hours ago. Tyranid vanguard organisms have been sighted moving toward Hive Furus. There is no organized resistance left." Vosk's hands tightened on the edge of the display. She looked to the Inquisitor, who stood silently beside her, his mask reflecting the glow of the dying world. "And the beast?" she asked. The Inquisitor inclined his head slightly. "It lives. The Hive mind has focused its attention upon it. The battle between them has grown more complex." As if to punctuate his words, the entire spire shuddered violently. Loose debris fell from the ceiling as the ground itself rumbled like a living thing. Far to the east, a sound like 1,000 thunderclaps rolled across the city, followed by a pillar of fire that climbed into the smoke-choked sky. Seravax, the High Cardinal, stumbled forward, clutching his relic staff. His once pristine robes were blackened with soot and ash. "The Emperor's wrath is upon us," he cried. "We must strike down both heresies before they consume us whole." Vosk turned on him, her voice like a lash. "We have nothing left to strike with. My fleets are gone, my regiments are at. If you have prayers, offer them, but do not speak to me of weapons we no longer possess." Outside the walls, the ground split open. Trigons erupted in coordinated lines, their monstrous bodies tearing through manufactorum districts and spreading the swarm deeper into the hive's core. Behind them came larger forms, Tyranofexes, bio-titans, and living artillery beasts, that planted themselves among the ruins to vomit streams of corrosive death into the last bastions of Imperial defense. Seren's forces fell back toward the central shrine district, their steps dogged by the endless swarm. As they crossed a shattered causeway, one of his men cried out, pointing toward the horizon. There, rising above the smoke and fire, Godzilla appeared once more. His massive silhouette was lit from behind by the burning ruins, his spines glowing brighter than ever before. But something about him was different. His movements were slower, heavier, deep wounds scored his hide, black blood streaming down his legs and tail. The Tyranid Bio-Titan stalked beside him, its own body torn and seared, but still terrifyingly vital. The two giants circled one another, amid the ruins of an entire district, their growls and psychic screams merging into a sound that froze every living being in place. The hive mind had adapted again. As the Tyranid Titan struck, lesser creatures coordinated with perfect timing, swarming Godzilla's limbs and spine to hinder his movement. They sacrificed themselves without hesitation, throwing their bodies into his atomic breath to blunt its power. It was no longer simply one monster against another, it was the will of an entire world, focused through a single living weapon. Godzilla roared and unleashed a pulse of energy so intense that the air itself seemed to shatter. Entire broods of Tyranids were incinerated in an instant, their ashes scattering like snow on the wind. The ground buckled beneath the force, toppling the remaining spires of Hive Ophion in a slow, agonized collapse. Seren and his men were hurled to the ground by the shockwave. When they rose, they saw only devastation stretching in every direction. The city was gone. The land was gone. Even the horizon was lost in smoke and fire. One soldier whispered, what they all felt, the world itself. It's died. The Inquisitor's voice, calm and cold, reached Vosk through the crackling vox. Governor, there is no hope of reclamation. This planet is finished. The question now is whether its death will be contained, or whether it will spread to the stars. Vosk closed her eyes, as tears cut clean paths through the grime on her face. When she opened them again, she was hollow. Then we must pray the beast holds the swarm here, long enough for someone, anyone to... Far below, Godzilla bellowed once more, his voice rising above the screams of the Tyranids and the wails of the dying world. The sound was not one of victory or rage, it was something deeper, more primal, a declaration of defiance hurled into the void. And in that moment, Pelagos Theta ceased to be a world and became a battlefield on which the fate of countless others would be decided. The fires spread without end, consuming everything, while above it all, the shadow of the Hive Fleet continued to descend, blotting out the last light of hope. The fires of Pelagos Theta burned without end, but now even their light seemed feeble. A deeper darkness had descended across the world, a suffocating pall that went beyond mere smoke or ash. It pressed against the skin, clawed at the mind, and drowned every mortal thought in despair. This was not nightfall, nor a storm. It was the will of the hive mind manifest, a shadow so vast it reached into the immaterium itself and smothered the light of the Astronomicon. On the surface, soldiers and civilians alike faltered under its weight. Psychers screamed in unison, their cries rising to a pitch that shattered glass and sanity alike before falling silent as their minds burst like overripe fruit. Vox channels dissolved into gibberish, as if words themselves were being devoured. Navigators aboard the few surviving ships clawed at their own eyes, begging to be cast into space rather than endure the visions clawing through their skulls. Colonel Seren felt the shadow not as sight or sound, but as a taste of iron on his tongue, and a slow, gnawing emptiness hollowing him from within. His men staggered like sleepwalkers through the ruins, their movements jerky and uncertain. Some dropped their weapons entirely, staring into nothingness, as if transfixed by whispers only they could hear. A few wandered off into the mist without a word, walking straight into the open maws of Tyranid organisms waiting in the darkness. "Stay together," Seren shouted, forcing his voice to rise above the growing madness. "Eyes on me, you break formation, you die." His words rallied some, but others barely seemed to hear him. The swarm had become more than a physical enemy now. It was in the air, in the ground, in the very thoughts of those who opposed it. The Tyranids no longer needed to tear their foes apart. The hive mind was unraveling them from the inside. Above, the battle between titans continued,
but even Godzilla seemed affected by the growing psychic pile. His movements slowed, his roars taking on a note of strain. The Tyranid Biotitan pressed its advantage, guided by perfect unity with the swarm. Smaller organisms clung to its carapace, acting as extensions of its body. They swarmed over Godzilla like living parasites, biting deep into his wounds, injecting streams of corrosive toxins into his flesh. From the cliffs overlooking the battlefield, Saren watched through smoke-stung eyes. His hands trembled on the rail as he witnessed the impossible. The Biotitan's antennae flared with sickly light, and for an instant, the entire swarm seemed to scream, not with voices, but with a single thought made manifest. Godzilla staggered and froze, his spines dimmed, their glow flickering as though a great wind had nearly extinguished a flame. He roared, but it was no longer a sound of pure fury. There was confusion in it, even pain. His massive form swayed, and Saren's breath caught as he realized what was happening. They're getting inside his mind, Saren whispered. The Inquisitor's voice crackled over the vox, calm but edged with cold dread. The hive mind seeks to understand him, to claim him. It does not merely fight this creature, it hungers to make him part of itself. Saren's stomach turned to ice. The thought of the swarm wielding something like Godzilla, replicating his strength across 1,000 worlds, was a horror beyond imagining. In the skies above, the great hive ship descended further. Its pulsating tendrils reached down like the roots of some nightmarish tree, glowing faintly as psychic energy coursed through them. Each pulse sent a shockwave across the battlefield. Guardsmen dropped dead where they stood. Lesser Tyranid organisms spasmed in ecstasy, their limbs twitching in time with the hive ship's rhythm. The shadow deepened until even the fires of the hive seemed pale and cold. Vosk stood at the edge of her ruined command chamber, staring out over the dying city. She could feel the presence pressing against her skull, whispering promises of release, of silence, of an end to pain. She clenched her jaw until blood filled her mouth, fighting to hold on to the last fragments of her will. The Inquisitor stood beside her, unshaken, though his mask now dripped with condensation from the unnatural chill. "Governor," he said softly, "this is the true weapon of the hive mind. Not claws, nor teeth, nor ships. It is despair. It devours hope before it devours flesh." Vosk forced her eyes open. "Then tell me how to fight it." "You cannot," he replied simply. "You can only endure, or die screaming." Far below, Godzilla roared again, this time with defiance. His spines flared to life in a blinding surge of blue-white energy, cutting through the psychic darkness like a sudden dawn. The Tyranids around him convulsed and burned, their bodies igniting as raw atomic power erupted out. The blast sent the Biotitan staggering, its antennae sparking wildly, as its link to the swarm faltered for a heartbeat. In that moment of weakness, Godzilla surged forward. His claws tore into the Biotitan's chest, rending it open with primal strength. He bit down on its throat, shaking it like a predator with prey, and hurled the broken creature into the ruins of a fallen hive spire. The impact flattened an entire district, sending dust clouds spiraling into the air. But the victory was short-lived. The hive ship's tendrils pulsed again, this time brighter, stronger. From beneath the ground, fresh waves of Tyranid organisms erupted. They threw themselves not at Godzilla's body, but at his wounds, climbing and burrowing into the injuries with suicidal devotion. Their purpose was clear: to plant the seeds of psychic infection, to turn his very body into a weapon of the hive mind. Saren saw it happening and shouted into the vox, "Command, you must act now. They're trying to take him. If they succeed, it's over. Not just this world, but every world." The reply was static, broken by screams and the guttural chittering of alien voices. The shadow in the warp had smothered communication entirely. Saren was alone. They all were. Godzilla thrashed wildly, his roar shaking the heavens, but more and more Tyranids swarmed over him. The sea surged inland, drowning entire sectors as his massive tail struck the coastline in his rage. The ground split beneath Saren's feet, and he fell to his knees, staring up at the impossible bat. Vosk, watching through the shattered remains of her hololithic display, whispered a single prayer to a distant emperor she no longer believed could hear her. Please, let him win. But in the choking darkness, a deeper voice whispered back, alien and vast, promising that no victory would ever belong to mortals again. The shadow was complete, and the end had only just begun.
The world shook as if straining beneath the weight of titans. The shadow in the warp pressed down with relentless force, smothering all mortal thought, and for a moment it seemed that even the fires of Pelagos Theta would gutter out beneath its suffocating pall. The Tyranids moved in perfect synchronicity, an ocean of bodies converging on the staggering form of Godzilla. They poured over his limbs, burrowing into his wounds, their shrieks blending into the psychic hum of the hive mind's will. The great creature faltered, his once imposing bulk swaying like a mountain about to crumble. From the cliffs, Colonel Seren watched, numb with exhaustion and horror. His regiment was gone, his world gone, and still he refused to look away. Around him, the remnants of his men crouched low, their breaths shallow, as if even breathing too loudly might draw the attention of the monsters that now defined their fate. Seren's mind screamed at him to run, but his legs remained rooted, compelled to witness this clash of nightmares. Godzilla bellowed, a guttural, distorted roar that seemed to split the atmosphere. It was not only a sound of pain but of defiance, an ancient refusal to submit. The blue glow of his dorsal spines flickered like dying embers, weak, fading, almost gone. And then, for a heartbeat, there was silence. The hive mind pressed harder. The great hive ship's tendrils pulsed with blinding light, sending out a wave of psychic energy so immense that every human mind within hundreds of kilometers felt it as a spear of fire driven into the skull. Seren's soldiers collapsed, screaming. Navigators aboard what remained of the Imperial fleet clawed their own faces to ribbons as visions of endless hunger devoured their sanity. The Tyranids roared as one, their shrieking bodies thrumming in perfect unison. And then, amid that suffocating storm, something broke. From deep within the abyss of his being, Godzilla surged upward, his roar ripping through the psychic haze like a blade through rotten cloth. The glow, along his spines, reignited, but this time it did not flicker. It burned with a pure, searing brilliance, so bright it turned night into day. The light was not merely illumination, it was defiance incarnate, a primal force older than the hive mind's hunger. The Tyranids clinging to his form ignited where they clung, their bodies combusting into ash as the atomic energy seared through them. Godzilla rose to his full height, towering above the ruins, his wounds closing before the swarm's eyes as though sheer will was knitting his flesh together. The psychic grip faltered, broken by a presence the hive mind could not comprehend. For the first time, a ripple of something like fear passed through the swarm. Seren fell to his knees, shielding his eyes from the blinding light. "Emperor, save us," he whispered, but the words sounded hollow. What rose before him was no servant of the Imperium, it was something vaster, unbound by creed or law. The Tyranid Bio-Titan lunged, its massive scythe limbs cutting the air with bone-splitting force. Godzilla met the strike head-on, his claws closed around one limb, snapping it like brittle glass, and then he hurled the creature backward with a thunderous crash that flattened entire city blocks. The hive mind screamed through its vessels, the psychic sound so vast it shattered windows and toppled statues miles away. The swarm surged in response. Thousands of organisms threw themselves forward, a living tidal wave seeking to bury the Titan beneath sheer weight of numbers. Godzilla's spines flared again. This time the glow built not in pulses but in a steady crescendo, the very air trembling as raw atomic power gathered within him. Seren's vision blurred with tears and heat, but still he saw. "Get down," he screamed to the soldiers around him. "On your faces now." A heartbeat later, Godzilla unleashed his fury. The atomic breath roared forth in a colossal beam of searing blue-white fire. It carved through the Tyranid swarm, vaporizing thousands in an instant. The earth split open beneath its passage, molten rivers boiling up from the planet's depths. The Bio-Titan tried to rise, but the beam struck it squarely in the chest, tearing through its carapace and core. The creature convulsed, its psychic scream rising to a note so piercing that men died simply from hearing it. Then it collapsed, its bulk shattering the ground as it died, leaving only silence in its wake. The Hive fleet above faltered. For the first time since its arrival, its perfect unity fractured. Hive ships reeled in confusion, some colliding with each other as the great will behind them momentarily lost its focus. The endless rain of spores slowed, then ceased altogether. On the surface, Godzilla stood amidst the carnage, his breath steaming in the cold night air. His spines glowed with a steady, terrible light, and the Tyranids nearest to him scuttled backward in disarray. They had never known fear, not truly, until now. Vosk, watching through the last flickering picked feed in her ruined command chamber, clutched the edge of the console with white-knuckled hands. Is it over?" she whispered. The Inquisitor did not answer immediately. His masked gaze was fixed on the towering silhouette of the beast, the ruins of Hive Ophion smoldering around its feet. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured, heavy with a weight none of them wished to bear. "No, it has merely changed." Godzilla threw back his head and roared, a sound so vast it seemed to shake the very stars. The remaining Tyranids broke, their cohesion shattering as their psychic link faltered. They scattered into the ruins, mindless now, their hunger without direction. But even as the swarm crumbled, the ground itself quaked anew. The ocean surged violently, as if answering Godzilla's call. Massive fissures opened across the landscape, spewing steam and fire. From the depths came another rumble, deeper and slower than before, a sound that was not the hive mind's scream, but something more ancient still. Seran's heart froze. There's something else down there." Godzilla turned toward the sea, his massive form casting a shadow that seemed to stretch to the horizon. For a moment he was perfectly still, his burning gaze fixed on the waves. Then his spines began to glow brighter than ever, a signal not of retreat, but of ascension. The hive mind reeled, its gambit broken, its champion was dead, its will faltering, yet still it hungered, still it fought, desperate to claim even a fragment of this unstoppable force. From the hive ship above, new tendrils lashed downward, a final attempt to ensnare the beast. Godzilla roared, his entire body blazing with atomic light. The tendrils withered before they could touch him, vaporized by sheer radiance. His tail swept across the ruins, obliterating the last of the Tyranid spore chimneys in a single motion. For the first time since the fall began, the skies above Pelagos Theta cleared. The shadow in the warp receded like a receding tide, leaving only a void of silence in its wake. Seran looked up through the smoke, his face streaked with tears. He's win. The Inquisitor's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "No," he said, "he has become something greater. The Hive fleet is broken, but what stands before us now is no longer merely a beast." Godzilla raised his head, the light of his spines illuminating the wreckage of the world. In that glow, he was not savior or destroyer, but king, unchallenged, unbound, and utterly beyond the comprehension of mortals. And as his roar rolled across the burning world, even the stars seemed to tremble in answer. The sudden collapse of the shadow in the warp left a silence that was almost unbearable. It was not the silence of peace, but of absence, like the breathless void left after a scream. Across Pelagos Theta, the scattered remnants of Imperial forces, the dying masses of civilians, and even the swarm itself froze in eerie stillness. The air hung heavy, filled only with the distant crackle of fires and the low rumble of the sea. Colonel Seran rose slowly from where he had been thrown to the ground, his ears ringing. Around him, his surviving soldiers staggered to their feet, dazed and hollow-eyed. For the first time since the nightmare began, the constant psychic pressure that had gnawed at their sanity was gone. The hive mind's presence had been severed, leaving its creatures writhing in confusion. Lesser Tyranids skittered aimlessly through the ruins, no longer coordinated, attacking one another or collapsing in heaps as their bodies spasmed without direction. "It's over," one guardsman gasped, his voice trembling. "Saints alive, we've won." But Seran's heart remained heavy. The emptiness left behind by the hive mind did not feel like victory. It felt like the moment before a blade fell. Godzilla stood at the center of the devastation, his massive frame illuminated by the fires of the fallen hive. His spines still glowed faintly, each pulse timed to the deep, rhythmic thrum of his breathing. Around his feet lay the broken bodies of countless Tyranid creatures,
their remains forming a grisly ring that stretched for kilometers. He was no longer simply a creature of the deep. He was a force that had torn the heart out of the swarm and left its vast intelligence reeling. High above, the remaining hive ships drifted in apparent disarray. The once perfect formations now wavered, colliding with each other like rudderless carcasses. Aboard the Gloria Invictus, Captain Voskar watched the hololithic display with narrowed eyes. "Is it fleeing?" his adjutant asked, her voice fragile with hope. Voskar shook his head. "No, it's regrouping." The Inquisitor, silent until now, stepped forward. His mask caught the dim glow of failing console lights, reflecting it like a shard of glass. The hive mind cannot allow itself to be broken. It has been wounded, humiliated. It will gamble everything to reclaim dominance. Voskar turned sharply.
"You think it can recover from this?" "It will try," the Inquisitor said, his tone absolute. "If it cannot reclaim the swarm, it will consume it rather than let another force rule its flesh."
"Watch closely, Captain. We are about to witness its last move." The hive ships stirred, their tendrils writhed and intertwined, fusing together into a monstrous configuration. The air itself seemed to heave as vast reserves of bioenergy were unleashed. Below, on the surface, every surviving Tyranid organism reacted at once, their confused movements snapping into perfect, sudden alignment. They turned toward the sea, abandoning battles and prey alike, drawn by a single imperative. Seran stared in disbelief, as entire broods stampeded past his position, ignoring his men completely.
"Where the hell are they going?" he muttered. The answer came a heartbeat later. The ocean heaved upward, a wall of water rising so high it eclipsed the burning horizon. From its depths emerged a new monstrosity, the largest yet born of the hive mind's will. It dwarfed even the bio-titan Godzilla had slain, its form a nightmare amalgamation of countless organisms, fused into one. Dozens of clawed limbs writhed across its body, each the size of a hive spire. Its maw was a jagged chasm that gaped wide enough to swallow an entire city block in a single bite. Bioluminescent sacs pulsed along its flanks, glowing with the malevolent intelligence directing it. The creature's psychic scream tore through the planet like a hurricane. Men dropped dead instantly, their brains liquefied. Vox systems exploded in showers of sparks. Even the scattered Imperial fleet recoiled, hulls groaning as the wave of raw thought passed through them. Godzilla responded with a roar so deep it rattled the very crust of Pelagos Theta. His spines blazed to life, casting a blue-white dawn across the battlefield. The two titans locked gazes, and in that moment, every living thing knew what was about to occur. From the cliffs, Seran gripped the stone so hard his fingers bled. "By the throne," he whispered. "That thing, it's not just here to kill him, it's here to consume him." The hive mind's last gambit was clear. If it could not control Godzilla, it would absorb him. His flesh, his strength, his essence would become part of the swarm, replicated endlessly, until no force in the galaxy could stand against it. The colossal creature struck first, slamming its massive limbs into the sea and sending tidal waves crashing across the coast. Entire districts vanished beneath walls of water. Ships were swept aside like toys, their crews screaming as they were dragged under. The hive mind's creation surged forward, its bulk tearing apart everything in its path. Godzilla met it head-on, his claws tearing into the creature's armored hide. The impact shook the planet. Massive fissures split the land, devouring buildings and fortifications alike. The sky itself seemed to tear open as their roars collided, a duel of sound and will that echoed into the void. Above, Voskar's fleet struggled to maintain position. "All guns, fire at will," he shouted. "Target anything moving near that thing's core." But the scale of the battle rendered their efforts meaningless. Macro cannon shells detonated like sparks against the creature's hide. Lance strikes left only smoldering scars. The true war was between the Titans, and the Navy were ants beneath their feet. The hive mind pressed its advantage. Tendrils lashed out from the creature's body, wrapping around Godzilla's limbs, dragging him toward the chasm of its maw. Lesser organisms poured from its flanks, swarming over his form in a writhing tide. The psychic scream intensified, a wordless command,
that clawed at the edges of reality itself. Seran's men watched in stunned horror. One of them sobbed openly, falling to his knees. "We're doomed," he said. "If that thing takes him, it's over. The galaxy, everything." But Godzilla was not finished. His spines flared brighter than ever before, the light so intense it burned through the haze and smoke, stabbing upward into the heaven. The sea boiled around him as raw atomic power gathered within his core. The hive mind's tendrils recoiled, sensing the danger too late. With a final, earth-shattering roar, Godzilla unleashed his fury. The beam erupted from his maw, wider and more powerful than any before. It struck the creature's chest and bored through its mass in a single, unbroken blast. The hive mind's scream became a shriek of agony as its champion convulsed. Its limbs flailed, tearing apart entire sections of coastline as it writhed. Above, the hive ships detonated one by one, their synaptic links severed. The swarm fell into chaos, organisms collapsing or turning on one another in mindless frenzy. The final blow came as Godzilla drove forward, ramming his massive bulk into the creature and tearing it apart with his claws. The ocean swallowed the remains, the waters churning red with ichor. For a long, terrible moment, there was only silence. Then, slowly, Godzilla rose from the depths. His spines flickered weakly, but he stood victorious. Seran wept openly, his tears lost amid the ash and salt spray. He did it, he breathed. The Inquisitor's voice came through the vox, calm and cold. "No," he said, "he ended this, but there will be others. The galaxy is infinite, and so is hunger." Godzilla turned toward the ruined coast. His eyes burned like twin suns, and though the Tyranids were shattered, every human who saw him understood the truth. He was no ally, no savior, only a king whose reign was measured in fire and ruin. And as he roared, the sound carried across the broken world, a final declaration that the war was his alone, and that Pelagos Theta now belonged to him. The roar faded, leaving only its echo to tremble through the ruins of Pelagos Theta. It rolled across shattered cities and drowned coasts, reverberating through mountains leveled into plains of rubble, until it dissolved into a silence so profound it seemed alien. The world, once deafened by endless battle and psychic screams, was now utterly still. Colonel Seran stood amid the remnants of what had been the inner sanctum of Hive Ophion. The spire that once reached proudly into the heavens was gone, reduced to jagged stumps of steel and stone jutting upward like broken teeth. Smoke curled lazily through the air, a last whisper of the fires that had consumed the city. The smell of charred flesh and acidic ichor clung to everything, a permanent scar etched into the senses of those who had survived. Around him, his remaining soldiers moved, like specters. Their faces were hollow, their eyes distant. Many carried their weapons not with readiness but with numb reflex, as though letting go of them would sever the last fragile thread binding them to reality. They did not speak. There was nothing left to say. The Tyranid swarm was gone, not defeated in the conventional sense, but annihilated. Without the will of the hive mind to bind them, the creatures had turned on one another or simply collapsed, their bodies strewn across the landscape like discarded puppets. The once relentless tide of alien hunger had receded, leaving behind only the remnants of its devastation. But victory tasted like ash. Seran walked to the edge of a massive fissure that split the city in two. It descended deep into darkness, a wound carved by the titanic battle between Godzilla and the hive mind's final champion. Far below, faint plumes of steam rose from the boiling waters that had swallowed so much life. He could still feel the residual tremors beneath his boots, the heartbeat of a planet forever altered. "Colonel," his adjutant said quietly, approaching with slow, deliberate steps, "we've begun accounting for survivors." His voice faltered. "The numbers are low. Entire regiments are gone. Entire hives." Seran's gaze remained fixed on the horizon, where the ocean met the ruins of the coastline. Godzilla's silhouette loomed there, distant but unmistakable. The great beast stood half immersed in the churning waters, his spines glowing faintly with residual light. Though the Tyranids were shattered, he did not retreat. He simply watched, unmoving, as though considering whether to leave or to finish what little remained. "How many?" Seran asked at last, his voice hoarse. The adjutant swallowed. "Perhaps a few 100,000 across the entire world, out of billions." Seran closed his eyes. For a moment, he allowed himself to feel the weight of that number, and then he pushed it down into the same cold, empty place where he had buried everything else. "Get them gathered. Fortified zones, ration lines. Order won't come back, but something like it must." His adjutant hesitated. "And the beast?" Seran opened his eyes again and looked toward the distant figure on the shore. "We leave it alone," he said. "We don't provoke it, not unless we wish to join the Tyranids in death." In the remains of the orbital fleet, Captain Voskar stared down at the world below. The Glory Invictus floated amid a graveyard of wreckage. The stars were partially obscured by drifting debris, silent tombstones for the countless lives lost in the void. His bridge crew worked without speaking, their motions mechanical. "Status reports," Voskar said, though his voice lacked its former authority. "2 cruisers remain operational," an officer replied, barely above a whisper. "All others are gone. Navigators are still incapacitated. Vox relays are failing intermittently." Voskar nodded slowly. His thoughts were heavy, his chest tight. The Imperium had won a hollow victory at best. Pelagos, Theta was lost. Even if they could rebuild, the world would never be the same. The Inquisitor appeared beside him, emerging from the shadows like a spectre. His mask was spattered with dried blood, his posture as rigid and unreadable as ever. "You've seen it," Voskar said quietly. "Tell me truthfully, what are we meant to do now? That thing is still there, and the Hive Fleet is shattered but not destroyed. When the next swarm comes," the Inquisitor's voice was cold and measured, "when the next swarm comes, it will find this world a graveyard. The Tyranids will not return soon. They will adapt, as they always do, but this loss will wound them deeply." He turned his masked gaze toward the glowing silhouette below. "As for the creature, it will remain until it chooses to leave, if it ever does." Voskar's hands tightened on the command throne. "We could strike now, while it's weakened." The Inquisitor shook his head. "You could try, and you would die. The creature is beyond our comprehension. It is not ally or enemy. It simply exists." On the surface, Vosk walked alone through the ruins of her spire. She no longer looked like a governor, her finery torn and blackened. Her people were gone, her authority reduced to a memory. She stopped before the remnants of a shattered statue of the Emperor, its head lying cracked amid the rubble. For a moment she knelt beside it, her hand resting on the cold stone. She whispered a prayer she no longer believed in, not for salvation but for forgiveness. Then, far away, Godzilla moved. His colossal form shifted as he waded deeper into the sea. Waves surged outward, flooding the ruins anew. He paused only once, turning his massive head toward the land he had torn apart. His glowing eyes seemed to linger not on the survivors, but on the world itself, as if acknowledging it for the final time. Seren watched from the cliffs, his breath caught in his throat. For an instant, he felt a strange, inexplicable connection, a recognition between predator and witness. Then Godzilla roared, a sound both triumphant and mournful, and slipped beneath the waves. The sea swallowed him completely, leaving only ripples to mark his passing. The silence that followed was absolute. The hive mind's scream was gone, replaced by a void, so deep it seemed unnatural. The Tyranid bodies that littered the landscape began to rot, their alien forms collapsing into pools of foul ichor. Fires burned low, starved of fuel, until only smoke remained. Seren stood amid it all, and finally understood. This was not victory, it was survival. Survival bought at a price so high, it left nothing worth celebrating. Inquisitorial ships would come, the Administratum would record the events in cold, precise language. The Imperium would speak of valor and sacrifice, but those who lived through this day would remember the truth. A world consumed, a fleet destroyed, and a king risen from the depths only to vanish again. As the sun broke weakly through the haze for the first time in days, its light fell on a world of ashes, and in that fragile dawn, Seren whispered the only words that felt honest.
The war isn't over. It never was. It just changed shape. Behind him, the distant sea rolled on, vast and inscrutable, hiding the sleeping god beneath its surface. The silence held, for now.